Today's topic is climate action. Hello, everybody. Good to be with you once again. Today, we have with us a research scholar and economist, Dr. Suresh Babu, who is going to talk to us about what he's doing and why he's doing it. He's a scholar, so let's listen to him. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Subodh. It's a pleasure to come and join your series of interviews that you're doing. I watched some of them. They are not only informative, but also highly motivational and inspirational because we hear from not only people who have accomplished experts, but also we hear from the youth who are coming up in your series. So keep doing it, and congratulations on a successful series that you have started. So, like I said, I'm privileged and to be honored to be with you because your accomplishments on themselves is inspirational for me.
Let's talk about you, sir.
I'm saying this because I'm going to connect with what I'm doing with your work as well.
Okay.
For a long time, you have been an energy specialist and you've contributed to development of the energy systems, and that relates to the climate action, and that's the reason why. Okay. I even thought I should sit with you and talk to you, and maybe later on we can expand our discussions beyond this call. But in the context of my talk, my current work involves getting the policies and strategies that are written at the national level or even at the global level, global agreements on climate change, to action on the ground. And I am a firm believer that if things don't change at the household level or at the community level or at the farm level or at the landscape level, we are not actually making any impact with the policy research or policy economic work that we are doing. So I'm a firm believer. Why I'm saying that is that I've always been in the field working with the farmers. I started my career as an extension worker in India. In southern India, particularly in Tamil Nadu. The picture you see right now on the screen is a picture that is taken with the panchayat leaders, whom I brought in this April. Actually, this is in June, the picture taken just last month. When I was in India. So the motivation behind that is this conviction that if you do not translate economic principles, economic theory into applied results, and that applied results get into policy framework, and that policies are translated into action, we are not really doing something to change the world or contributing to the welfare of the society. And broadly, as an economist, we should be kind of worrying about that kind of thing. What is that we do on a daily basis it is poverty alleviation or climate change or malnutrition or environmental degradation, you name it. But the translation of what the thought process or the new knowledge that we bring in as scholars, it has to show on the ground in terms of people's welfare. Okay. So from that perspective, I've always gone between this global kind of debate and dialogue, participating there, and then getting into the ground level, grassroots level, what is happening. So that's been my passion, to connect these two extremes. And then you play that role. So the motivation for me comes from basically I was attracted by Dr. Norman Borlaug. You see him in the picture.
Yes,
he is the father of the Green Revolution, and I was motivated to study agriculture because of his Nobel Prize in 1970 for his achievement in Green Revolution and so on. And as a grad student, I had a chance to meet with him when I was at Iowa State doing my PhD in economics. And he came to give a lecture, and I went to see him and then introduce myself. Basically, he was so enthusiastic, and I went and met him in his hotel room and talked to him for 2 hours on that weekend. And I told him, you are my hero, but I need to learn from you what you have done and what motivated you to come to countries like India and Bangladesh, Pakistan, and change the agricultural system there. And he generously gave time. But 2 things he said, and for the people who are watching it, if you are young people, you need to reach out to the people who have done it before you. And that's what I did by kind of crook and by accident. I met with them. So he said 2 things that really impacted my work and my life, basically. He said 2 things. One, as an economist, don't sit in the air-conditioned office and write policy paper. One thing. And that hit me like a ton of bricks, actually, at that time. Like, wow, Second thing he said is, you need to go to Africa. That's what he said. He immediately said, "You are from India. I know you can go back to India and work in India, but India has a lot of people, educated people." This is in the mid 80s, okay, late 80s rather. And a lot of people there educated, they can solve their problems by themselves. But in Africa, we do not have human capacity. I would like you to go to Africa and work on green revolution related issues. We need to. So that is the motivation for me. And then he said, when you go to Africa, don't again sit in the office room, but get to the field and get your hands dirty. Okay. That's exactly the words he used. Get your hands dirty, work with the farmers. Yeah. So then Dr. Per Prinsep Anderson, who see in the picture, he was the professor of food policy at Cornell University at that time. He gave me an opportunity to take, he took me as his postdoc. When I finished at Cornell, and later on, and of course, he was also Director General of International Food Policy Research Institute, where I work as a senior research fellow right now, which is like for the people from different parts of the world, it's like a professor title you get in an academic institution, but we call them fellows, research fellows like that. Right. I'm a senior research fellow at IFPRI. And Per Prinsep Anderson, as a leading food policy economist, even now he's retired now, but then he's still an influential figure in our field. He keeps, he guided me in terms of my African journey. He gave me an opportunity to go to Africa. And then when we went there to actually work on food policy issues, the country that I went first was Malawi. And there immediately in 1991, we faced with the famine conditions. Right? I mean, we go to do long-term development, food security and nutritional security kind of, but then you are faced with emergency issues. You are in a crisis mode. I was in the center of the storm, trying to calculate, how much food is needed, how much commercial imports are needed, how much food aid is needed, and where should the food aid go. So it's all the basic need for a government to plan and execute disaster intervention, for example. Thereby, working for 3 years there, we kind of prevented famine kind of situation. Not a single, the Economist magazine at that period, that point in time, they said about 600,000 people will die in Malawi. That was a prediction of Economist magazine, but not a single life lost because of the collective work that we did in that. So that's kind of put me into what Dr. Norman Borlaug really said. You should go and get the hands dirty. I had no choice in Malawi to get my hands dirty. So then I returned back to Cornell, and then from Cornell, I switched to International Food Policy Research Institute in Washington as a research fellow, and I continue to stay here and work here. So over the period, I worked on environmental economics, nutrition economics, which was my passion as a graduate student. My thesis was on demand for nutrients in India. With the new econometric techniques of time series cross-section data, kind of that was panel data that was coming up at that time. Right. And then I quickly moved on to nutrition economics as a field, and my book is out there on nutrition economics. It's basically a textbook for a master's level, PhD level students who want to apply economic principles to nutrition, and nutrition students want to come to economics. That's a kind of a bridging multidisciplinary book that's out there. Anyway, that's just a plug-in for my book. But more importantly, that led me to see what is the connection between the national policies and the ground level reality of making impact. And that's all development is all about. Development economics is all about that. And whether you use econometrics, whether you use randomized control trials, whatever methods you use, how do you translate the national policies which are guided by evidence, guided by research, guided by analysis into action on the ground, so that finally you see the benefit of the policies and programs for the people that you are trying to reduce poverty or increase nutritional status and so on. So in that context, in the last 10 years, I've been working on climate action. So I just want to give you an overview of what we are doing right now. So of course, climate action is important now. You turn on the new television or the newspaper, wherever you do right now, you go and see. It's in this morning in NPR, for example, 2 news items were on heat waves that we are facing, California fires, and So climate change has become not only a hot topic, but also an immediate imperative to act on for all of us. That's no doubt about it. But again, how do you do that in the context of development? And that's where my focus is. While you go to India, Thailand, or Nepal, or Bangladesh, they all have the strategies in the national policies. They have committed to the global commitments, but how do they translate that into action? What kind of translation should be done, and what is the approach? So this is where the program that I'm working on is called CASI, Comprehensive Action for Climate Change Initiative. I just want to talk a little bit about it and my experience in that. And of course, we can dwell on that, but give you an overview because time is limited. It is
there's no limit, please. We want to hear it.
Yeah.
No time limit.
It is funded by USAID. The background is quickly, as we all know, Trump administration kind of pulled out of Paris Agreement and for ideological or whatever reason that was, political reasons. But then when President Biden came in, he kind of quickly joined the Paris Agreement and wanted really to get going with the climate action. So the paper that White House put together is called Prepare. It's out there in Google. You Google it. It's called Prepare on climate action. That what U.S. government wants to do, and then a derivation of that is the USAID Food Climate Change Strategy that is put out by USAID. So we are, in essence, working on that strategy, but in an action mode in the countries. So this CASI approach is basically funded by USAID. It's a USAID program, CACCIglobal.org. You can check it on the web.
Yeah.
But I am taking the responsibility. I've taken responsibility for the past 1.5 to 2 years to work on Asia part of it. And although I have good experience in Africa, but there are people who do Africa work, but I have taken the responsibility for Asia with my colleagues, my team, and so on. So basically, what we are trying to do is at 2 levels. One, at the national level, at the policy level, we call it policy systems, and in the context of climate change, how these policy systems operate, who makes climate change policies, how do the policies come about, and how do they make policies and strategies, and based on what are the evidence that they have at the country level. Take for Indonesia, for example, there is so many different environmental issues Indonesia faces, energy issues they faces, but then in the context of that, what do the Ministry of Environment and the Department of Climate Change, for example, our Directorate of Climate Change, what are they doing in terms of collecting information, organizing themselves, putting the policies and strategies together, and tracking the investments that they need in order to act on those policies, and where are the challenges. So in that context, we are working from the global level, which is, global, regional level, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And then within the regional level, we go into sub-regional level. For example, Asia is a big region. So we work on South Asia, Southeast Asia, Far East, and then Central Asia. I just returned last week from Tajikistan from Central Asia, where we are actually implementing it. I'll talk about that little bit here to give the context in where we are going. And then, of course, from the national level, you need to see, like I talked about, the local level, at the farm level, landscape level, community level, and even district level or even provincial level, depending on how the political system is organized at the country level. Okay, so at the global level, we see this COP as a major activity. Now, the COP 27 last year, 28 this year. It is a congregation of people who are working on climate change, from the policy to action to investment, and private sector, public sector. They all come together and then share knowledge, exchange ideas, share the successes and failures that they face, and so on. So at the global level, we are engaged closely at the communication. Right. So the last COP was in Egypt. It was a very, very useful in terms of new ideas that is coming, particularly in the context of food security, food systems, how it affects the climate change, and how climate change affects the food system, and so on. Now, at the regional level in Asia, we are working with the ASEAN, for example. It's a very broad association of Southeast Asian nations, where they do have strategies and policies at the regional level. So how do we connect? How do we connect with them and then harmonize our work with this regional activities? One side. That means a lot of diplomacy, a lot of trust building, a lot of visiting the organizations. I learned quite a bit in terms of shaking hands with the leaders in the regions, and talking to them, and what is important for them, what is the demand for the kind of work that we do from the policy. Otherwise, our work doesn't become relevant for them. So how do we connect the research, economic work to the demand that is there for policy making and strategy making? Okay, that's an important connection. Sometimes, unfortunately, researchers kind of ignore, because it's very important for them to continue the research, because that's what they do. But then to seeing the benefit of the research in terms of translating that into policy, either at the regional level or at the national level, is important. So at the national level, we have started working at the policy system level in several countries, building their policy system, bringing the actors and players together, and see how they interact, how they come up with the priorities for their countries. How do they agree on priorities for investments? And how do the investors like multilateral banks, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and others, how do they come in and see the opportunity there for the countries to benefit out of it? Then from the national level, we move to local level. I will give an example of where I'm actually involved in this farm level type of activities connecting to the national policy in Tamil Nadu in India. So that we'll talk a little bit about. We'll move a little bit quickly with that kind of. You see that the approach is basically this global goals we need to achieve, and then that translate into national commitments, and national policies and strategies are already written, and we need to help them write and set priorities in case they don't have one. And then that has to be backed up by evidence in terms of what priorities they need. That's where the research comes in. That's where people like my colleagues in my institute, they conduct a lot of research on modeling climate change, their impact on economic systems, and priorities for each country to go into various sectors, whether it is agriculture, energy, infrastructure, transportation, health, whatever subsectors that we need to deal with. How do we set the priorities? And then within the subsectors, what are the immediate opportunities for adaptation and mitigation? And there is always the debate about what is important, adaptation or mitigation. Let's not get into that. And my broad conclusion is that you need both. You can't just ignore one. If you ignore mitigation right now, then that becomes a major problem later. All your children will be keep on adapting to things that are coming. The generations after generation, they will be only doing adaptation. But adaptation is very important right now, because you see the climatic disasters that are happening. Vulnerability is very high. So you got to start with the entry point is adaptation, but you see the opportunities also where mitigation can be done. And how do we marry that? That's again a context-specific, locality-specific decision that we need to make. We'll touch upon that some of this. So this is like the real work, actually, what we are talking about. How do you take the global commitments to national policies, to programs and policy actions, and then how do you implement, and how do you learn from that implementation? And so when we say implementation, there is a huge set of challenges there. The capacity is missing. The institutions are not organized for implementation. And even within the institutions, the human capacity is lacking, for example, to design locality specific. So all this becomes like not only a challenge, but also opportunity to kind of intervene and invest. And then go at the farm level. How do you convince a farmer who is struggling to just sell his crop season after season because of the market variations, and there is also climatic variation, that all sorts of uncertainties, but still you are convincing him to not only adapt, but also can you adopt some of the mitigation measures as well? I mean, it is possible, but how do you work with the people? How do you develop the trust with the people? And how do you engage with the people on the one hand at the grassroots level, knowing their language, knowing their problems, and then come back to this panchayat level. I'm talking about in Indian context, panchayat level, district level, state level, and the national level, and so on. It's a hierarchical kind of. So try to work with all these levels is when you can see the motion of policy getting into action. Otherwise, we are just talking. I mean, at least, like I said, 30 years ago, I was convinced because of my Malawi experience, if you don't get to the field and see the change on the ground, that means there is nothing happening. To me, as far as you can do all research you want, you can publish all books you want. But if you are interested in changing people's lives, touching people's lives, you got to get to the field and know what is needed there. So anyway, that's the broad picture. I won't get into the details of the program, but I'll give some examples of the countries where we are working. Let's give you a flavor, and your viewers can reach out to me later, and we can get into the detailed debates and discussions. And I'm reachable on the Google. Just my name, type my name.
Okay, fine. Yeah, let me just say that I'm very happy to hear it, and let's continue.
So in the approach that we are taking in CASI approach, I mean, it's a kind of a joint effort. USAID colleagues, IFPRI colleagues, Michigan State University and other universities, and also African colleagues, Asian colleagues, coming together, think through what is that is needed, what is missing right now. We are talking about climate change. We are talking about, if you look at the speakers in the panel, you have panels after panels talking in global meetings about all, they say political will. Yeah. What is that political will after all? And who is that? You're talking about politicians, policymakers, they should make a decision and so on. For them to make decisions, we need to guide them. We need to be there to guide them, because if you take a prime minister of a country, president of a country, they will say, I mean, I'm interested in working on climate change. I want to take care of my people.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they need guidance. Who is advising them in terms of the policy action, in terms of, so that is what was kind of, we saw that missing a little bit, that dimension. Some countries are good at that. Some countries are well developed in the context, and some countries don't. So but then there is a range of capacity gaps. So how do we approach this problem? So 3 sets of engagements that we came up with that is useful, and we are implementing them. And the first one is evidence-based, particularly policy analysis, alternative adaptation and mitigation intervention at the country context, which is very straightforward. I mean, we're taking the country as a whole. What is the context in which the country is developing, which development stage the country is, what it can afford, where it can go in terms of adaptation, where it can go in mitigation. There is resistance also in the country level, right? We can't do this. And this rhetoric always, you have done all your development from the West and you've spoiled our world. Now we have to develop and we have to grow. And this rhetoric is always there. You go from the prime minister office to the village. That's what they will say. You guys drove cars for last 100 years, and we have to just start. We are just starting to buy the car, and you are saying we should not use the fuel. I mean, that's true. I mean, we have to empathize with that. I mean, that's true. We all know that. But at the same time, what can we do right now, trying to not only grow and develop, but at the same time, minimize the cost of development in the context of climate change. So that requires analytical work. That's one stream of work we do. The second stream is engaging with the multi-stakeholder platforms at the policy system level, because, even now, we know the pillars approach in the government. Agriculture does what it does, and we don't have to talk about that. It's all, isolated groups of people. One ministry doesn't talk to another ministry. In development, everybody knows that. But the challenge is, in the climate change context, how do we bring them together? How do we bring the transport minister and agriculture minister and infrastructure minister, or the health minister, or the energy minister, or forestry minister to come and sit in the same room and agree on a broader climate change goal, and agree on what is their priorities in their sector, so that they can do what they have to do for the larger goal of the climate action, right? So that is something that we are able to do. We are able to kind of work with them. It is a lot of diplomacy, lot of time, not necessarily a researcher type of work, but you go out of the researcher cocoon.
Yeah, there's not research.
You get into the diplomacy. You use your people skill. If you use your kind of the skill that you have developed over the years, the credibility that you have developed over your publications, they see your publication and say, "Oh, we have read your publication, and thank you for coming and visiting us." That's a good entry point for us as a researcher, because we have built that credibility in the last 30 years. We are able to kind of go and shake hands with them with the knowledge, and they respect you. And that is an entry point to kind of start working with them. It's not that they are going to agree to whatever you are going to say, but we want to listen to them. Even for that opportunity, you need this kind of credibility and the skill. And that is missing also in our development community. Either you give the loan and come back and track the loan, or you write a research paper and throw it at them. I mean, that's what is happening. But what is largely missing is this dimension of connecting the knowledge at the global level to the policy making system in a way that it's acceptable to them, in a way that you listen, you become a listener. Okay, that listening is very, very important. Let me leave it at that. The third aspect of it I talked about already is strengthening the systems, strengthening the institutional system, regulatory systems for not only implementing, but designing context-specific, locality-specific strategies for climate action. So, for example, if you take Africa, one country's strategy is not going to be suitable for another country.
No.
Even within a country, one district strategy is not going to be suitable for another district because ecosystems differ, agroecology differs, cropping patterns differ, the opportunity to intervene differs, right? So how do we translate that broad goals that we have at the national level into action at the localized decision making? This is what USAID Administrator Samantha Powers calls localization of decision making, involving the local institutions for implementing climate action. So at that stage, you need to think about what are the capacities that are missing. What are the quick capacities that you can develop, and how do we improve that capacity for not only implementing but also reporting because you need to report at the national level what the progress you are making. Right. So these are the three streams of work that we have been involved in, rather to some extent successfully in the countries that we are debating with. Some countries are large, like India and Indonesia, that the political system and the policy process is different. We have to work differently compared to Nepal, for example, or Tajikistan, which is smaller countries, where it is much more easier to track who is doing what. So we have to also change according to the country context. So moving on, I just so this basically this approach we have taken, and we are investing in it from technical angle, and also in terms of implementation angle, and also thinking about how we can sustain this action after we leave. And that's very important, because we can work easily as long as the project is funded and there is some money to do the work and so on. But what are the sustainability angle? How will the national system take ownership for what we are doing with them and so on? That's something that we are working on. So basically, we are starting with the country governments. We bring in the international groups as NDC partnerships or global methane pledge. There are a lot of international groupings of actions. I mean, you just Google them. Climate action is full of international networks and coalitions. And how do we bring them to the country level? How do we bring them to at the same time, how do we bring them to the donors? So we are talking about looking at what is happening at the national level, bringing it to the State Department, for example, in the context of US, right? Or in the context of European Union, how do you bring it to the European Union donors and bilateral donors, and then connect them to the action on the ground so that they can buy in so they can put the money where the money is needed, because the funds are limited, even for climate action. But they have to put that money in the right place. So how do we guide them? That's one area of our work, building the partnership between the development assistance players on the ground, bringing in at the country level, bring them together. Okay, so Germans are doing hydroelectric, right, in investments, and European Union is doing water resources. Maybe USAID is doing agriculture-oriented, feed the future-oriented, food system-oriented, but they're all doing good work on the ground. But how do we bring that, integrate that, mainstream that in the climate action?
All right. Yeah.
So that's something that we need to think about. So that's part of it, and assembling the evidence. Particularly, more assessments are needed on the ground. We don't know where to intervene. So we talk about, okay, we can reduce methane emission.
Yeah.
But what is the emission now? I mean, where are you going to? So the assessment of methane, for example, is a simple example. How do you then it becomes what is the method that you use to assess the emission of methane in a country, and how do you use the modeling and then use that information for scaling decisions and bring that to joint resource commitment, as I said, of the donors who are acting at the country. And the donors landscape at the country, and you need to work with each one of them. You have to walk in physically to each one of the building. I climb up and down. I don't need exercise in this. I just walk stairs up and down of each donor office and each ministry. That is, I come back and see my watch, it is 10,000 steps already, which is my goal. I don't go to even gym when I travel to these countries. Yeah, so that is the kind of work that is needed. You walk stairs up and down and then meet people and connect them. And it is happening to me. At least I'm seeing kind of progress in that. People talk to each other now. And people even tell me that, oh, this is the kind of coordination that was missing. I'm glad you could come in and bring us together. It takes a one-day workshop to bring in, hey, tell us what you're doing. Okay, come and eat lunch with us and share your knowledge. And let's see who is doing what, how can we connect each other and so on. So that's, again, an approach that we are taking at the policy level. To give you some examples how we mobilize at the global level. For global level, again, CASI Asia, we launched it in Egypt in COP27. So we have a pavilion where we brought together the Asian, colleagues to come and talk about what is their need in terms of translating policy into action, right? So just to give a flavor, the colleague from Vietnam is talking, what is his need? Colleague from Cambodia is sitting there, just to give you some pictures. And then we take that kind of a demand coming from the countries that we capture at the global level to the regional level. Now I'm here online talking to the decision makers in ASEAN. ASEAN organized a climate action conference. So I couldn't go to Indonesia, Jakarta, but I was on the online talking about what is that we are learning from Asian countries at the national level. So how do we translate that at the regional level priorities? And this is something that I want to give you a flavor of. So then from the global level, you work at the regional level, you got to engage all the time. It's a lot of work, by the way. I mean, constant emails, constant communication, constant meeting the demands. When they require you to be at 3 o'clock in the morning, because Jakarta, it's 3 o'clock in the evening, you got to get up and make that presentation. So you can't do development like a 9-to-5 job. It's not 9 to 5. No. So it is like it's like a mission. I mean, we call it mission whenever we go out and travel, but it's really a mission in terms of attacking where and looking at opportunities. Where opportunities comes, grab it right away, because every window of opportunity that opens, we got to enter in. Otherwise, that windows will close quickly. So this is the dynamism that is needed. That's what the point I'm saying. So it's not a passive work. Then at the country level, of course, I'm working with Tajikistan as one of the key countries. Tajikistan is one of the vulnerable countries, top 5 vulnerable countries, because it's facing the glacier melting on the other side of the Himalayas. On the one side, Nepal is facing it. India is facing it. On the other side, Tajikistan is a country, Pamir Mountains, the glaciers mountain. And there is a huge problem. But that is also an opportunity where the water can be used for hydroelectric, in terms of reducing the carbon footprints, and you can go into renewables. So I am working with them to think about how to translate the national level policies into action on the ground. Closely working with the Ministry of Agriculture and Ministry of Environment, bringing them together, Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Water and Irrigation, Ministry of Forestry, bringing them all together at the country level. Here you are speaking at seeing the Minister for Environment from Tajikistan speaking at the Global Tajikistan Pavilion in COP27. So we help them to organize the pavilions in order to bring the cross-country South-South learning. So that's what is happening here. So just to give you a flavor of that work. Of course, in Tajikistan, we work on the food system, particularly on the country. We have started working with the the policy systems, organizing the policy systems, strengthening the NDC implementation secretariat, who is coordinating the whole action, climate change. How do we guide them technically? How do we guide them in terms of implementation? How do we guide them in terms of tracking, monitoring, reporting, and verification, and feedback mechanisms in terms of learning? And how do you take the national policies to the farm level implementation? So that's the whole range of actions that are being pursued in Tajikistan. But there is full support of the USAID mission, I should say, in funding it. So we found a donor. CASI itself is a program organized by the donor USAID, and it is funded at the country level by the missions. And this is very helpful because the mission support is crucial in terms of what their priorities and also how that priority connects with the government. So we have been able to play that bridging role in terms of bringing the funds as well as the action on the ground. So here, as a result of this, we were able to connect, the Tajikistan pavilion I talked about in COP27. There was a meeting of Secretary John Kerry with the Minister for Tajikistan Environment, where they talked about how Tajikistan can benefit from the global engagement, particularly the global methane pledge, which Secretary Kerry is, leading. And that kind of gives the countries motivation, for example, to get engaged in the international level, even though the countries may be small, but this kind of ambassador, the nature of the diplomacy work that Secretary Kerry is doing, is helping the countries to think about how they can engage at the global level. How can they engage with the US, for example, in terms of not only technical knowledge, but also seeking investments and bringing the private sector connecting to the carbon markets, and of course, reducing the methane and other greenhouse gas emissions, for example, just giving the flavor. So it is not just one action, but it is a stream of actions on broad spectrum. So that is, I think that spectrum is important, because you can do 9 to 5 or day to day, you do something, but you got to have a broader picture in mind, where you are going, what you are accomplishing. And anyway, so then coming back to my passion at the ground level. So just June 2nd week or so, we were able to bring the leaders of the panchayat. Panchayats, as you know, for those who do not know Indian system, panchayats are the local administration which are independent, which are funded by the government, but they can make decisions about where they invest and how to set priorities for development in that panchayat level. But the major problem is it is also politicized, because its panchayat leaders belong to one party or the other to contest elections, and it is driven by party politics to some extent. But beyond that, you also find panchayat leaders who want to do something for their panchayat. They also want to take action. These are the young. So I got hold of about 20 to 25 panchayat leaders who are committed to developing their panchayats with climate-oriented action. Right? We kind of took stock of who are these leaders in that, and then we kind of brought together in one place to think about how can we actually prioritize climate action at that level? What are the opportunities? Is it changing the bulbs in their panchayat to LED bulbs, or planting more trees, or changing the rice farming system into much more methane-friendly farming, or livestock farming into introducing biodigesters and reducing the methane emission? A wide range of possibilities. At the panchayat level. So that gives us an opportunity now to come back to the policy level.
Well,
what is feasible?
Let me just pause you here. The other day, I talked to a professional like this, same thing, where the speaker was the former IFC World Bank colleague of mine, Alan Miller. And the point he was making was that we really need to focus on methane. I'm glad you're mentioning it, because he said that we have to have a long-run strategy, and we have to, what he called as a marathon, and we need a sprint. And in the sprint is the need to focus on methane right away. Because his point was that in the short run, which is the next 10 to 20 years, methane is not 24 times more destructive than carbon dioxide. In the short run, methane is 84 times more destructive than carbon dioxide. And if you want to look at the short-run climate change that you're seeing now, what people are now calling climate anomalies, and you want to hit them in the short run, then you need to do methane reduction. In the long run, of course, you need to do all CO2 and all greenhouse gas emissions. But he convinced me that in the short run, we really need to talk more and more methane. So we need to have two tracks now, the marathon track of 2050 or 2100, and the sprint track to 2020, 2035. And in that prominently is methane. So I thought I'd just share that knowledge. But sorry to take so much time. Let's proceed.
No, that's a very good intervention as well, because the emphasis, I just kind of glided through this methane issue. You are absolutely right. I'm totally convinced, and on that, particularly, that's why I mentioned about Global Methane Pledge, in which about 150 countries are already participating. It gives a platform for us to think about, how can we devise opportunities at the country level to quickly intervene on the methane side. And even in agriculture, rice farming system provides an opportunity right now, and we are thinking about how to change the system of flooded cultivation of rice to dry seeded, sowing direct seeded method, or even alternative wetting and drying. And we are starting to experiment that in the context of methane reduction in Tamil Nadu right now. And we'll talk about that more. But I totally agree with you, and that sprinting is what is needed. And that is why we also need to have assessment of what is happening in methane to show to the local governments and even state governments in Indian context to see, hey, you're already contributing to the methane emission, and we can actually do something about it, right? So that is in that context with this panchayat work that I'm doing, and we are going to be training panchayat leaders to come up with annual climate plans. So they are not only having development plans, but they will also have a climate plans that kind of integrate the climate action with the annual plans that they have, so that it is an integrated approach. Not just agriculture, it is energy, it is, like I said, waste management, because a lot of waste management comes under panchayat's responsibility, and it is afforestation, it is water saving, not only at the farm level, farm ponds and so on, but also at the household level, and also the electricity saving in terms of changing their bulbs, changing their fans, that uses less electricity, and solar intervention of alternative sources of energy and wind energy at that level. This can happen. I mean, I'm convinced that at the local level administration, if we can demonstrate that that panchayats can become climate neutral, and then we have scaling up with that, we can scale up quite a bit, right? So that's the objective of this work. And it is possible. That again requires sitting down with them on the floor. As you see, there is no table and chair in this room.
Table and chair,
we all sat on the floor, on the mat, the grass mats that we have in India. And that is how you connect with the people and listen to them mostly, and help them in their planning activities. That's the India work that we are doing right now. And I'm going back to India in a couple of weeks again to work with them. And in Bangladesh, we are bringing the national policy system again. It's again talking to the policymakers, being there with them in webinars, seminars, panel discussion, engaging them in debates and dialogues, then kind of goes into the media. So this particular meeting, I'm posting it up there because this had a huge media coverage. The local Bengali newspapers covered it in terms of what are the issues, what are the actions that Bangladesh can take, and who are the actors and players and so on. I'm just wanting to give a flavor of that. So you also want to play that role in terms of attracting the media, because journalists are very important to pass the knowledge.
Of course.
And communication, policy communication is fundamental for our work, not only to communicate with the policymakers, but also communicate with the grassroots. So we have to engage on the policy level. That's a flavor here in Bangladesh. We are continuing. Bangladesh is one of the countries that we are working in Asia. And then Indonesia is another country where we are actually getting down to the ground level. These are the extension workers. We call it extension officers with the bachelor's and master's degree. They are the people who are actually working with the farmers, translating the action on the ground. So, but how do we understand their role? What are their capacity weaknesses? How do we assess their demand in terms of knowledge and resources? And that requires, interaction with them in terms of their knowledge on climate change. What are the context-specific, locality-specific problems that they are facing? So this is a flavor in Indonesia. And we then take this kind of discussion to the Ministry of Climate Change, the Ministry of Environment, and say, so connecting your investments, your priorities to these people, we can actually change the system on the ground. Okay, so that's the kind of uniqueness of CASI in terms of connecting this knowledge gap, action gaps from the policy dimension and connecting it to action and investment. So that's the flavor there. In Nepal, what we are doing is working with the Ministry of Forestry and Environment which is responsible for climate change, and the National Planning Commission. Of course, National Planning Commission has a broad overview of all the sectors. So it can bring the multiple sectors, multi-sectoral kind of action for climate change. So we have been able to work with them, and taking one province in Nepal, particularly Gandaki province, where frequent floods, flash floods, landslides disturb agriculture. In fact, the sadness of that is in the same agricultural season, during the season you have drought, and when whatever crop you get at the end of the yield, this a flash flood comes and destroys the crop. I mean, what are the farmers supposed to do in this? I mean, we blame it on climate change because it's happening frequently. But so how do we help them to adapt? Because adaptation is the entry point there. At the same time, how do we avoid future, work at the infrastructure level, taking advantage of investments in infrastructures, preventing the floods and larger kind of investments that are needed to protect these farmers in the long run. So that's what is happening in Nepal, and I'm going to Nepal in 2 weeks again to work with the provincial level planning commission. Nepal has already moved from this central level to federated kind of system now. It's in the last 5 years. That means the provinces have national planning commissions, and the challenge is how to bring the investments to them and then work with them at that level. So, but that already you can see the capacity is weak, and we need to build the capacity of the institutions there. Then moving on, of course, we have been working with other countries. Fiji, for example, there is a big need because the country can sink anytime. It's in the Pacific Ocean. Water rises, levels are rising, and Thailand has shown some good examples of climate smart agriculture. We can learn from them. So it's not only that working at the country level, but learning from south in the context of what other countries are doing. Quickly to summarize, this is the broad, taking the global commitments that nations make to the global pledge, to national level policy system strengthening, to take them to action backed up by development partners coming together, working together in a coordinated manner, investing their resources where they can also show the benefit of their investments. At the same time, put the money where the action can be impactful at the grassroots level, at the farm level, at the household level, and at the landscape level. So with that, let me also talk a little bit about connecting the international organizations. There are a lot of organizations who are committed. They are already on the ground. We are not the only players, right? We are just connecting them. We are just coming in to see the gaps and filling the gaps. But then FAO, IFPRI, and World Food Program, a lot of United Nations organizations are already on the ground. They are working for many years, World Bank and Asian Development Bank. How do we interact with them and see what their role is in the national level? And that's also another important role that we play, connecting people, connecting projects, and identifying opportunities for them as well as for us, working with the national systems. Just an example of FAO here. And of course, getting down to the field, planning and working with them is very important. Just getting your hands dirty while you plan, it should be owned by the people. This is an African example. I was in a remote state in Nigeria some time ago, and a very fulfilling activity when your guidance, your expertise can be translated into local plans and local action on the climate change and climate action level. It's really fulfilling. Going from the Washington level to the ground level has been a fulfilling mission for me, and I've enjoyed my career in this connecting policy to action, and in the middle, strengthening the capacity of policy systems and institutions and the people. Like I say, even if you don't pay me, but don't tell my organization that, but if you don't pay me, this is what I would be doing.
All right. Okay. Well, are you finished with the presentation?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
Okay, well, I have only one comment. Okay. You must have found a way to create a clone of yourself, because one person cannot do so much work.
Yeah, that's a comment I get. How do we clone you? My boss always said, how do I clone you? Which is a compliment.
I think you've already cloned it. It's not how do I clone?
Yeah, capacity strengthening is the way to clone. Yeah, this 20 years I've been hearing that we need to clone you kind of thing. But then capacity strengthening is how you clone. You multiply your knowledge. You work with the planning commissions. That's why I'm passionate. I'm head of the capacity strengthening for IFPRI, by the way. That's why I work on this department of capacity strengthening, because that is when also when you can say I am done and it's now the people who are doing it. Okay. Then until that time, development is not done. Development is done, when development is success, when you know that you are not needed there. Right. So so that is the principle that which I started long time ago. My success comes from making other people successful. And when I am not needed, that is when I can say I am successful.
That's correct. That's the right criteria for success. When they don't need you anymore, that's success.
Yeah, that requires capacity. I mean, you know much more than me in your field. I mean, you've taught people. The capacity is when you create one of you there, and let them loose. They go and figure it out, and they multiply that capacity. That's the important thing.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to add? Let's get rid of the slides so that it's just the two of us.
Okay, stop sharing. Yes, wonderful. Okay, first of all, let me thank you for this series that you have started, and it's a worthwhile thing. Your series I watched in the last couple of days, your YouTube channels and the people who came along, and I like your way of participatory listening approach and giving the speakers opportunity to say more. And also your knowledge, and you have gained so much through your career. Your career itself is a model career for some of us.
Okay, but let me not talk about myself.
No. I'm saying this because the viewer should know.
Okay.
They can Google you and find out. But for me, at least, you've been in both academics and development. That is the model that I am also following.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I have been through miles and miles of rural Africa where there's no electricity for 30 miles. In the radius of 30 miles, there is no electricity. I've traveled through the length of rural Indonesia, going to islands, Komodo Dragon, where there are Komodo dragons, not going to Bali, but going to Sulawesi, going to Maluku and all that. I went and asked, we're trying to do rural electrification. And I asked one teacher, I would always go and talk to teachers and so on. I said, how will this, because, okay, everybody wants to watch TV because they want to watch World Cup soccer and they want to see Miss World. Okay, fine. But is there any other benefit? And this teacher said, listen, we try to teach them that there's a parliament in Jakarta, but they don't believe it.
Yeah.
Because there's nonsense. Just show us Miss World and football,
Yeah, partly because of the disconnect.
Yeah, but he said that if you can bring the TV to me, and I said, then the students won't study, they'll be watching TV. He said, that problem you leave to me. I have my own ways of handling my students. So I've been through this, and I'm so glad to hear it from you that you are still doing it. And really, I'd like to get some of your counterparts from other countries to come here and talk about it from their perspective.
Sure.
Especially countries that don't tend to get much exposure. Indians, they are always getting exposure. Even Indonesia, people are getting exposure. But some of the countries you mentioned, like especially the Central Asian, they don't get that much exposure. I'd love to have those people come and talk about what they're doing. And I'd love to have you come back in 6 months, not with this overview, but with some very specific things that you are achieving or close to achieving. So let's get something very, very practical in the next, so maybe in December or January or whenever is convenient to you, we will have another series with you. And in the meantime, with some of your people who you work with, and let them come and explain what is going on, because this is supposed to be a global channel. This is my first decision that, earlier we used to have Wall Street Journal, it was just for Wall Street, then the New York Times, which is a bit bigger, then the London Times, and then USA Today, okay? Finally, they said USA. I'm saying this is global channel.
global
We don't want it to be narrow. Okay. And by the way, what I've found is that the youth have a global attitude. Okay. They are already globalized. It's too late to talk against globalization because their attitude is already global. They just pick up their phone and they connect to anybody in the world. What is globalization? Nothing. They are connected. So I'm also trying to be global. Love to get people from these countries. Okay, so let's end it here today. And we talk a bit after this. And let's say bye to our viewers. I'm so thankful to Dr. Suresh Babu for coming and talking to us at such length and explaining exactly what is going on with climate change and using both adaptation and mitigation, which is both are needed. So let's say bye and see him maybe in 6 months or whenever he's ready again. Okay, I'll have another expert or young person. Bye-bye.